Welcome back. This is Becky Freemal with WFXR News here in Roanoke, Virginia, with Virginia at Work every Sunday night with me, Lynda McNutt Foster, my partner in crime, I will say, for Sundays. Lynda, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
She is with Cortex Leadership Consulting, and also David Emerald, the author of The Power of TED. David, thanks for being here.
I'm delighted.
This is a very interesting topic, and we are 3 deep into these sessions of conversations. And we could probably go on for hours, but we'll try and wrap this up on this one. And let's talk a little bit again about the power of TED, or as we've been calling it, the DDT, the dreaded drama triangle. And David, I'll start with you. We were talking about, and Lynda had mentioned that there's a persecutor, victim, and a rescuer. The victim seems to be the hardest one to acknowledge if you are, in fact, the victim. How do you help get that victim out of that stage and into a creator and more of an empowered stage?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that, especially in our culture, it is tough to own our sense of being a victim. And again, to me, one of the litmus tests is, am I complaining? If I'm complaining, I'm in that victim space. But here's the thing, that in a relationship with someone else who is in that victim space, one of the lessons that we've learned, in some cases the hard way, is that you can't argue against someone else's feeling of victimization. What you can do, and this is a way that you can help them shift, is to acknowledge, to make sure that they know that you hear them, and then to help shift their focus to a more empowered place. So it may sound like something like in previous podcasts we were talking about Joe coming into the office and dumping, would be to say, boy, I can really hear the frustration that you feel when Joe comes in and does that to you. Mm-hmm. And what steps can you take? And is the really important word here, because and is the shift. It's like, and how can you prepare for the next time that happens, and to have a more empowering conversation with him about what it is that he is really wanting.
Interesting.
So you empathize and then shift.
And I would assume it has got to feel good as the victim to finally have that aha moment and get into the empowerment stage.
It does. And one of the things I really want to acknowledge is that at one level, what we're talking about sounds really simple, and it is simple cognitively, and it's not easy. and it takes practice. I mean, the reality is that we really are hardwired. Actually, I should say we're deeply wired, because I don't believe that we're hardwired, but we are deeply wired as human beings to be on the lookout for problems, to pay attention to anxiety, and to react. That's the FISB, or the focus interstate behavior, that Lynda was talking about in the previous podcast. And that in order to shift, we need to be able to shift our focus not away from the problems to the outcomes that we want to create. And we solve problems in service to those outcomes. But the real shift is the shift from focusing on what we don't want to what we do want and what we do care about, because that will then help us tap into a more impassioned inner state that drives a whole different type of behavior, which is creative in nature, as we go about creating what it is that we care about.
Lynda, you do a lot of this work that David has authored this book about, and you've talked to him about here in the Roanoke area. What do you see when you're working with teams, time-wise, and just how it finally starts operating kind of like a well-oiled machine? How long does it take to get them out of that dreaded drama triangle when you're working with a company that's in it? And it's got to be a good feeling as a consultant to be like, yes, they're doing it.
What you start seeing is innovation happen. Innovation is a space that only occurs in the empowerment dynamic. It only occurs when you're focused on that vision and everybody's working together. It's very difficult to brainstorm ideas, which is a necessary part of innovation, unless you're in the empowerment dynamic. So what you see is companies recover much more quickly to market fluctuations. Mm-hmm. So when people are in the empowerment dynamic and you can get a whole team to operate in that space on a regular basis, especially meetings, if they can come together in meetings, one-on-one and group meetings, and something has happened, suddenly you start seeing a market trend where vehicle sales or truck sales are going to be down, or there's a law coming down that's going to kind of slow down your forward momentum. These teams that are able to stay in the empowerment dynamic can overcome the biggest challenges, and they can remain on top. I know Ryan Holiday came out with a book a couple years back called The Obstacle is the Way. And the empowerment dynamic is all about that. It's about seeing whatever obstacle in front of you is my next challenge. How can we actually use that and get through it in a way, ride it in such a way that it becomes the way for us to be able to succeed, be competitive, and come out on top.
Have you ever had a case, either of you, that you thought, oh, Lord, this is just hopeless?
I've had some situations that have been more challenging than others. But I think that as a consultant or even as a team member, if we can hold one another as creators in the moment, whether others are acting like it or whether they know it or not, that my experience is that there is usually a way through. Now, sometimes we may need to call time out. But one of the other things that we've seen is that, and Lynda, I'm sure this is true for you as well, is that once the language is established of the empowerment dynamic and the ways of thinking, the ways of taking action, that team members start playing roles. I was with a company just a couple weeks ago, and they shared with me being in a meeting that was very challenging. They were facing some of the kinds of challenges that you were just talking about, Lynda. And somebody finally spoke up and said, you know what? Nobody's asking any real questions here. Who will take the role of coach during this meeting? And that there are times where there'll be kind of an assigned challenger. And again, the challengers are not a naysayer, but it's challenging assumptions. It's challenging from a learning and growth standpoint, things like what aren't we looking at? What assumptions are we making? And so one of the things that we see is that not only with the language, but then there are skills associated with a creator and especially challenger and coach that over time can absolutely be developed.
I can talk to this in a very practical sense. It only takes a mustard seed of willingness. If they don't even have a mustard seed, so on an individual basis, you come to me, you want me to coach you, or you're being told you need to come to me, which I'm like, give me one session and I'm going to see. Yeah. Right? Because if you don't even have a mustard seed of there's an openness, there's a willingness to see it in another way, that's hopeless. Not because it's forever hopeless. It means until that person is open to having a different perspective at all, it's going to be difficult to coach them. On a team, it's very difficult to get all 10 people in an empowerment dynamic, let's say. We would love that. That's like our perfect world, right?
The Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail. What you're probably going to have is 7 of those people, 8 of those people who can really shift into the empowerment dynamic after this work. And you've got a couple of people that if you can literally just get into neutral. Instead of working against the process, simply just being in the process is very helpful.
David, what do you see? I understand you do work with some obviously big companies like Google, names that everyone around the world know about. When you work with major companies, and in a way, Lynda just discussed this, which is there's so many different departments and so many different groups. You might be putting a fire out in one spot, and then you're like, oh, we got it. And then all of a sudden behind you, another one's flaring. I don't know if you ever get the Holy Grail on a company that big.
No, and I'll tell you why. And that's because we're human beings. I heard a professor one time say, we hire employees and people come in their place. And the reason why I bring that up is that this discipline of empowered relationships is just that. It's a discipline and it's a practice. And yet we all are at times going to go reactive. We're going to have our different inner states, and we're going to get triggered. And so it's really, to me, more a matter of increasing the awareness so that when we do find ourselves in one of the drama roles, we can acknowledge it within ourselves. And then, to me, a true act of leadership, and I've seen this happen sometimes, where a person will say, you know what, I just realized how victim-y I'm sounding, or I just realized that I'm really wanting to jump in and rescue, and to be able to name in the moment what's going on for oneself can actually help shift the entire group. So to me, the measure of progress is it 2 steps up to 1 step back, so to speak. That there's always going to be things that we do need to react to, but over time we can be much more proactive, much more in that quadrant 2, putting our time and energy against those things that are not urgent but are very important to us.
You know, and as I listen to that, David, I think really what you're trying to do is have an ever increasing level of awareness. It's not
Right.
about arriving.
Mm-hmm.
It's about really understanding that every day you're going to wake up and you're going to have an ever increasing level of awareness. And some days you're going to get to the end of the day and you're going to go, I was in the DDT all day, the entire day, right? And then the next day you're going to go, I spent the morning in the empowerment dynamic. Boy, didn't that feel good? And bam, I went right into the DDT again. And you know how you know that you're more in the empowerment dynamic than the dreaded drama when you've really started turning the corner? When you're not noticing everyone else in it anymore. You're simply just focused on your own accountability to
Even
being
as a
in
leader.
it. As a leader, when you start going, how often am I, and how am I showing up, and am I demonstrating a space of empowerment instead of drama on a regular basis, and what percentage of the time am I in that space?
And awareness really is key. And one of the techniques that we really suggest to people is that, with the ubiquitous nature of smartphones, is to set not a loud alarm, but to have your phone buzz like every 2 hours or so, or maybe even randomly, and to catch your attention so that you can stop and say, okay, the last couple of hours, where have I been mentally? Where have I been in looking at the way I'm relating to people, or the way I'm relating to whatever's going on around me? And am I in a drama relationship, or am I in a more empowered relationship? But to call that awareness to the fore, so that then I can be a choice. Because to me, ultimately, this work is about the reality that as creators, we are always at choice as to how we choose to respond to whatever situation we find ourselves in.
So here's a question I have for you, David. And Lynda has talked about this. My gosh, it was so much information. It might be from your work. It could be from the 52 other people that she she gleans information from. But that when anxiety is up, production is low. I think that has been ingrained in my mind from her classes. And this fits right into that. So when anxiety is finally low and production is up, tell me what that looks like. What do you see happening at a workplace when people are finally, when it comes to the bottom line, which is what we're all there for in the end?
Yeah, what I see is that I'll pick up on Lynda's word of innovation. You start to see creative ideas flow, that people can challenge one another without taking it personally. But again, it's challenging from a learning intent. But what you see is increased passion, increased creativity, and a real focus on being able to answer the question over and over again: what's the outcome that we're trying to accomplish? What is it that we're going after? And in that process, there will be times where, and what are the problems or the obstacles that we need to overcome in order to move toward the outcomes that we're trying to create together? But there's just a whole different energy, and it's both more passionate, but it's in an odd way less personal, in the sense that when we're in the drama, boy, we take things personally, and it's very me-centered. Whereas in the empowerment dynamic relationships, it's us-centered and our stakeholder-centered and outcome-centered rather than personal.
Interesting. And I would assume you probably see the same thing here in Roanoke, Lynda, that when you get your clients back up and running, things are just running smoothly.
Yeah. So think about it this way: they move from first you have to get them to cooperate, then they move into collaboration, and what you finally see is this cohesion. They're working together as one unit towards a single vision, and so there's a acceleration of progress and proactivity. So they're proactive. So you see them making time for that quadrant 2, that urgent, that not urgent, but highly important. That's starting to be on their calendar as a non-negotiable thing for leaders. So you see them thinking more strategically, acting more intentionally, and speaking more effectively. So they start understanding that words really do matter, and that they're painting a picture for somebody. And so as they're giving feedback, receiving feedback, they're really thinking about what that word means, double clicking on those words and going, Becky, what did you think or feel when I said that? How did that land? Tell me what you just heard me say. Right. And there's this safety in that space to be able to ask that. And there's this safety of, look, I'm not going to look incompetent because I don't have the answers. Actually, there's this shift to, wow, I'm a lot more competent if I ask really good questions than if I go around thinking I have all the answers.
Right.
Or pretending that I have all the answers.
Pretending I have all the answers, but I really don't.
Well, and before we go, David, I would love to ask you, I know that you've authored The Power of TED, and you've authored another book you said about diabetes, but you also have another one coming up, right? We want more.
Yes.
We want more.
Yes.
And the working title is 3 Vital Questions with a subtitle of Applying the Power of TED to Work and Life. And if I can, I very briefly say what those 3 questions are. The first question is, where are you putting your focus? Are you focusing on problems? Are you focusing on outcomes? Empowerment comes from focusing on outcomes. The second vital question is, how are you relating? How are you relating to others, to your life experience, to yourself? And are you relating in ways that produce or perpetuate the drama we've been talking about? Or do you relate in ways that empower others and yourself to be more resourceful, more resilient, more innovative? And then the third vital question is, what actions are you taking? If you're in that reactive, drama-filled kind of environment, you're going to be reacting to the problems of the moment. Whereas if you're in a more empowering mindset and empowering relationships, you're going to be taking generative creative action, co-creative action with others in service to the outcomes that you care about.
Looking forward to that. I can't wait to read more on that. David Emerald with The Power of TED. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My real pleasure. Thank you.
And
Thanks,
Lynda
Becky.
McNutt Foster with Cortex Leadership Consulting. And, of course, I'm Becky Freemal with WFXR News. We will sign off for this series of Corecast, but don't worry, we have plenty more, I have no doubt, coming your way. Have a good one.